Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're gonna kind of get into, the stuff you see in the supermarket, like all those everyday products,
Okay.
and we're going to explore the world of risk management in the consumer packaged goods industry.
CPG.
Yeah, CPG, exactly. You sent over some like really fascinating material, including a CPG risk survey from Barnard Dunnigan Insurance,
hmm
and we're gonna unpack all of that with our expert right here. So.
It's really interesting. It's easy to just grab like that bag of chips or that shampoo bottle and not really think about how it actually got there. Like all the steps.
Yeah, like all the things that could have gone wrong along the way.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
like a hidden world behind our everyday stuff.
Totally.
The survey starts off by highlighting how much the CPG industry has grown, like recently,
Sure.
right? And they talk about how e-commerce has, fueled that and the ripple effects of COVID-19.
The pandemic, yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely shook things up. And with all that growth, CPG companies are facing like a whole new set of challenges.
Like what kinds of challenges?
Well, you've got supply chain disruptions, which are always a headache, and then consumer preferences. They're changing so fast these days. And then, of course, you've got the regulatory landscape. It just keeps shifting.
So, like, you can't just make a good product and call it a day.
Right. It's way more than that now. You have to understand these risks and really manage them proactively.
So, like, risk management is essential now, not just an option.
Exactly. It's not just about reacting to crises anymore. It's about like anticipating them, mitigating them, and maybe even turning them into opportunities for growth.
Oh, that's interesting, like turning a risk into a positive.
Yeah, that's where things get really strategic. And that's important, especially for you, the listener, because investors are really zeroing in on how companies manage risk these days.
Really? Why is that, you think?
Well, put yourself in the investor's shoes. You're basically betting on a company's future. You're going to want to know that they've like really thought about what could go wrong and that they have a solid plan, right?
It's like due diligence for investors.
Exactly. A good risk management strategy shows that a company is well managed, prepared for the unexpected, and that makes them a much more attractive investment.
So it's not just about the product itself or their market share. It's about showing they can handle whatever comes their way.
You got it. Investors are looking for those companies that can minimize losses and maximize their chances of success, both in the short and long term.
And a good risk management program does that. Okay, well, let's dive into the nitty-gritty a bit. The survey actually lists the top 12 risks that are keeping CPG executives up at night.
Yeah.
It's a pretty daunting list, from pandemics and inflation to product liability and damage to their reputation.
It really is a mixed bag.
Yeah.
You have some external factors, things outside a company's control. And then you have internal risks that they can manage directly, like take the pandemic.
Right.
It totally disrupted global supply chains. A lot of companies weren't ready for that. It was shortages and delays and prices went crazy.
And we saw how one product recall can just wipe out a brand's reputation, right?
Yeah.
It happens all the time.
All the time. That's why you absolutely have to have a plan in place for when that happens. Like you've got to be able to act fast, decisively to contain the damage.
Okay, so you have a plan, but then the survey mentions that even within a company, executives see risk differently. And they talk about how their departments, influence their priorities.
Right, and that can be a problem. Like you get these silos where departments aren't talking to each other about risk. The CEO might be focused on competition. The CFO is all about financial risks. And the CMO is worried about the brand's image and market share.
It's like they're all worried about risk, but not in a unified way.
Exactly, and that's where things fall apart. The key is to break down those silos and make risk awareness part of the company culture. Everyone needs to be talking, sharing information so they can identify and tackle those risks together.
And this is all super relevant for our listeners out there because as your company grows, risk management becomes even more important, especially if you're trying to attract investors.
Right. Think of it like this. Investors are putting their money on your future, right? So they want to see that you've not only thought about those potential risks, but that you have a concrete plan to deal with them.
So it's not just about having a cool product or a great pitch. You have to show them you understand the risks involved and how you're going to handle them.
And that's why the survey recommends getting specific types of insurance. It's kind of a must-have when you're raising capital. You've got your general liability, professional liability, property insurance, business interruption, workers' comp, and then even more specialized stuff like product liability and cyber and data protection.
It sounds like you really can't skip insurance, especially as a company grows.
Yeah, those policies are like a safety net. If things go south, they can offer some financial protection and give you some peace of mind as you navigate the CPG world.
And speaking of navigating, let's talk about supply chains for a minute. That's something the survey really dives into.
Yeah.
It's this whole web of suppliers, manufacturers, and distributors. And with all the global disruptions lately, it seems like a pretty risky business.
Well, yeah, we've seen how fragile those supply chains can be.
Mm.
Pandemics, natural disasters, even political stuff in another country can have a domino effect and mess everything up.
And for a CPG company, that means delays, product shortages, and, unhappy customers.
Definitely. And the tricky part is, even though you can't control every single part of your supply chain, at the end of the day, you're responsible for that product. You have to deliver.
So how do CPG companies manage that risk? Where do they even start?
Well, the survey actually offers some great advice. First of all, do your research. Don't just pick partners based on price or convenience. Dig a little deeper, look at their track record, are they financially stable, and what are their own risk management practices?
So you're looking for partners that are as committed to quality and reliability as you are.
Exactly. And once you've chosen your partners, you need clear contracts. Outline everybody's responsibilities and liabilities so there's no confusion later.
What about backup plans? What if your main supplier suddenly can't deliver?
Oh, you definitely need a plan B, maybe even a plan C. Diversify your supply chain whenever possible. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket.
The survey also mentions having a risk mitigation plan. What does that actually look like in practice?
Think of it as a roadmap. It's how you're going to deal with potential problems. It outlines steps for different situations, from natural disasters to cyber attacks.
So you're prepared for anything.
Well, as prepared as you can be.
Yeah.
And, of course, don't forget about insurance. You need adequate coverage in case your business is disrupted or you run into product liability issues or, your supply chain hits a snag. It's a vital layer of protection.
So much to think about. We've covered a lot of ground here, but there's still more to explore. Maybe next we can take a closer look at some specific risk management strategies, like for product launches and then for dealing with product liability.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so we've talked about the big picture of risks for these CPG companies. Now let's zoom in on one of the most, I guess, exciting parts, but also one of the riskiest, launching a new product.
Yeah, it's kind of like walking a tightrope. So much potential there. But you make one little mistake, one oversight, and it can cost you big time.
Yeah, delays, damage to your brand, even legal problems. And this survey actually gives 10 tips for managing risk, specifically for these product launches. And the first one they mention is legal reviews. Why are those so important?
Well, you're putting something new out there.
Right.
You've got to be absolutely sure that it meets all the regulations, labeling, packaging, safety standards, ingredients, all that. A good legal review can help you navigate all of that and avoid those costly mistakes.
So you don't want to launch a product and then have to pull it off the shelves because you missed some tiny detail.
Exactly. And legal review isn't just about checking boxes. It's about thinking ahead, anticipating problems, and building in those safeguards from the beginning.
Okay, that makes sense. The survey also mentions warranty disclaimers. Are those really that important? I always thought that was just standard legal language, kind of boilerplate stuff.
Yeah, but they play a really important role in managing liability. You're setting clear expectations for your customers, like what the product could do, what it can't do, how it's supposed to be used, what kind of performance they can expect.
So being transparent with your customers, basically,
Yeah.
about the product's limits.
Exactly. That way, everyone's on the same page. It protects both the consumer and the company. Less chance of misunderstandings or disputes later on.
Now, there are a couple of legal terms in here that I gotta admit I don't totally get. Indemnification and arbitration provisions. Can you break those down for me?
Sure. So those are all about protecting your company if you do end up in a legal battle. Indemnification basically means you're not responsible for certain losses or damages, things caused by someone else or something outside of your control.
So it's like a legal shield.
Yeah, think of it that way. And then arbitration. That's just a way to resolve disputes outside of court. It can be faster, cheaper, and more private.
Okay, so it sounds like having a good lawyer on your side is pretty important for all of this.
Absolutely. Find someone who specializes in product liability law. They can help you with all those regulations, write those contracts and warranties, and be there for you if any legal problems come up.
Like having a legal expert as part of your risk management team.
Exactly. They have the knowledge and experience to help you avoid those legal pitfalls.
Okay, now let's talk about product recalls. It's not the most fun thing to think about, but it seems like every company needs to be prepared for that possibility.
Oh, yeah. You hope you never have to use it, but it's like a fire escape. You got to have it just in case. A product recall plan outlines exactly what you're going to do if a product has a defect or there's a safety issue, how you can identify it, contain it, correct it. And it also includes how you're going to communicate with everyone, consumers, retailers, regulators.
So it's not just about fixing the problem, it's also about handling the PR side of things, how it affects your reputation.
Big time. If you do a recall right, you can actually minimize the damage to your brand. You're showing transparency, you're being accountable, and that builds trust.
So you're turning a potential disaster into a chance to show people you're committed to safety and quality.
Exactly. You take product safety seriously, and you're prepared to do the right thing to protect your customers.
All right, well, we've talked about launching new products. Now let's think about product liability in a bigger sense, like in a global market. Why is that such a high stakes area for CPG companies?
Well, think about it. We live in a really connected world now, right? So if something goes wrong with a product, it can have consequences far beyond your local market. Bad news spreads fast. It can hit your sales, your brand perception, even what investors think of you.
So you really need to be thinking about product liability globally and not just locally.
Absolutely. CPG companies have to be aware of and comply with the regulations in every single market where they sell their products. It's not always easy keeping up with all of that, but it's essential if you want to minimize risk and protect your brand.
And the survey has like 12 tips for managing all of that, product liability and contamination exposures. Let's dig into some of those. Starting with how do you demonstrate compliance with all those regulations? What does that actually look like?
Well, it's not enough to just say you meet the standards, right? You have
Yeah.
to prove it. You need
Okay.
the paperwork, the documentation. So that means keeping detailed records of your designs, your test results, manufacturing processes, quality checks. Basically, you need to be able to show that you've done everything possible to make sure your product is safe and meets all the rules.
So you need a good system for keeping track of all that, like from the beginning to the end of a product's life cycle.
Right. Think of it as your safety net. If someone sues you over your product, you need to be able to show that you followed the rules, that you did everything right. Good documentation is crucial for defending your company.
Makes sense. Now, a lot of these companies outsource some or all of their production. How does that affect this whole product liability thing?
Yeah, that adds another layer, for sure. When you're working with these outsourcing partners, you have to make sure they meet your standards for quality and safety. So that means regular audits, reviewing their processes, their documents, making sure they're following the rules.
So you can't just trust them blindly.
Right. You're ultimately responsible for that product, no matter who's actually making it. You have to hold your partners accountable and make sure they're doing things the right way.
So risk management is really a team effort involving everyone in that supply chain.
Exactly. Everyone has a role to play, from your suppliers to the people making and distributing your products. Everyone needs to be on board with safety and managing those risks.
The survey also mentions using reliable sources for all your product components, even the little things. Why is that so important?
It's easy to overlook those small parts. But even something tiny like a little screw or a seal, if it's defective, it can cause huge problems. Like a leaky shampoo bottle, a toy that breaks and hurts a child. It can lead to big recalls and lawsuits.
It's like that saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Right. You have to carefully vet every single part of your product and make sure it's high quality, from the raw materials to the packaging.
So taking a really holistic view of product safety.
Exactly. Even small mistakes can have big consequences when it comes to product liability.
And then the survey talks about the importance of training your employees.
Oh, absolutely. Your employees are like the first line of defense. They're the ones handling the materials, running the machines, putting the product together, doing those quality checks. They have to be trained on all the procedures, the safety protocols, and how to spot and report any potential problems.
So you want them to be proactive, not just reactive.
Right. And it's more than just training. You got to create a culture where they feel comfortable speaking up if something's wrong. They need to know you value their input and they won't get in trouble for pointing out problems.
It's about everyone feeling responsible for safety.
Exactly. Open communication and constant improvement, that's what you want. So everyone feels like they can contribute to making a safer, more reliable product.
And what about user manuals? The survey mentions those too.
Oh, user manuals are critical. That's how you communicate all that safety information and instructions to the people actually using your product. They have to be well written, easy to understand and easy to find.
So people use the product the right way and don't get hurt.
Exactly. You got to give them the information they need to be safe.
Out of all these tips, is there anything that really stands out to you? Something that's super important, but maybe people overlook?
One thing that's often missed is doing those regular risk assessments for each product.
Hmm.
I don't mean just once. You got to do it throughout the product's whole life cycle. Always be evaluating, looking for potential hazards, seeing if your safety measures are still working, and making changes if you need to.
So it's not a one-time thing, it's ongoing.
Right. Risks can change. New information comes out, technology changes, and how people use your product can change too.
So you have to stay ahead of the game.
The CPG industry is constantly evolving, which means the risks are changing too. The companies that really succeed are the ones that are always talking about risk, always adapting to those new challenges.
That's a great point. We've covered a lot here, from those early stages of launching a product to the long-term management of product liability all over the world. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about. Wow, it feels like, we've just dipped our toes in the water here.
Yeah.
But it's been really eye-opening for me to see just how much goes into managing risk in this industry. So much to think about for companies that are making the products we use every day. So what would you say are the biggest takeaways for our listener, especially, if they work in CPG?
I think the main thing is to realize that risk is just part of the game in CPG.
Okay.
It's fast-paced, things change quickly, so you can't be afraid of risk.
Mm.
But with a good plan, a good strategy, those risks can actually help you succeed.
So it's not about avoiding risk altogether. It's more about understanding it,
Right.
having a plan, and then, maybe even using it to your advantage.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
I mean, the CPG industry is all about innovation,
Yeah.
right? And innovation always comes with some level of risk,
Mm-hmm.
but you can minimize those risks by being proactive, doing your research, and putting those safeguards in place.
One thing that really struck me from the survey was how risk management isn't just a one-time thing. It's
Right.
you have to keep doing it. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah, it has to be part of the company's DNA,
Right.
part of how they do things. You're always asking questions, challenging assumptions, and adapting because things are always changing.
Yeah, and communication is key too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everyone in the company, from the CEO down to the, folks on the production line, they all have to understand risk management and how they fit into that.
Absolutely. When everyone's on the same page, sharing information, working together, that's how you build a company that can handle those inevitable bumps in the road.
That idea of resilience, it really resonates with me.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to, handle those tough times and come out stronger on the other side.
And remember, the CPG industry is always evolving, which means the risks are evolving too.
Right.
The
Yeah.
companies that really thrive are the ones that make risk management part of their everyday conversations. They're always adapting to those new challenges.
That's a great point. We've covered so much in this deep dive, and I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about when it comes to managing risk in this fast-paced CPG world.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's been fascinating for me, and I hope you found it as interesting as I did.
Yeah, and if you want to dig deeper into any of this, please reach out.
Yeah, we're happy to keep the conversation going.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.